Nearly 4 weeks, and the China-India border standoff at the Sikkim section shows no signs of calming down. How did this start?
Indian border troops overstepped the mutually recognized boundary line and crossed into Chinese territory. This move is a violation of the 1890 Convention.
Without a bullet fired since the 1962 border war, why are tensions rising now? India believes the Chinese construction work near the border is threatening its interests. What are India's concerns, and why has Bhutan become involved? Meanwhile, tensions in Kashmir are also rising, with deaths caused by recent shelling. Will the conflict between India and Pakistan bring more uncertainty to the regional situation? The expected meeting between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi didn't occur during the G20 summit in Hamburg due to what was called a broken atmosphere. And in just 2 months, the BRICS summit will once again bring the 5 leaders of those countries to meet in China. How will the current standoff affect the prospects of the BRICS gathering?
The continuing standoff at the Doklam Sikkim section of the China-India border, much tension in the past 3 weeks. China has protested a border crossing of Indian troops, while India objects to Chinese construction work in the area. And the July 8th deaths from shelling in the Kashmir region, disputed by India and Pakistan, create further worry about regional stability. What's happening in the China area? How is the situation affecting its neighbors? And what position does the adjacent country of Bhutan assume in the ongoing dispute? To discuss the China-India boundary standoff and more, I'm joined in the studio by K.J.M. Varma, China correspondent of the Press Trust of India, and Victor Gao-Zhikai, current affairs commentator. We shall also talk to Li Bijian, Minister Counselor of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in India, via telephone. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Victor and Varma, do you both agree that the current standoff will spin out of control?
I hope not. And there is also great likelihood that the current dispute will be resolved peacefully. I think we need to keep faith, and I think we need to continue with diplomacy. Let's give diplomacy a chance, or another chance. Let's do not despair, because any military conflict breaking out between India and China will be a disaster for both countries, and neither the Indian people nor the Chinese people would love to see that break out. Let's give peace a chance.
This is obviously a declaration of peace from Victor Gao. Do you have your faith about his faith on seeking a peaceful solution to the border dispute?
Well, to back Victor, I am just coming out of the Foreign Ministry briefing, and today, probably after 2 weeks of very heavy exchange, probably very big statements, and from the Foreign Ministry here, which we've been covering over the past 2 weeks, today is perhaps the first day that we had a very silent day from the Foreign Ministry. There wasn't no reference to Doklam and Sikkim sector and the issues related to India-China today in the Foreign Ministry in Beijing. And also today is also a silent day as far as the Chinese foreign media is concerned. And we are not seeing any of the shrill write-ups that what we have seen during the past few weeks. So it appears that I understand that diplomats between the two countries, through the channels, existing channels, are active, trying to work out a solution. Looks like we are not far away from finding a solution.
Despite so many sources of information about the current standoff between India and China in the Sikkim section of the joint border, Victor, can you brief us from your perspective on the real situation in the Sikkim section? Do you think it is a fact that Indian troops have trespassed into the Chinese territory?
I think from the Chinese perspective, yes, indeed, the Indian troops intruded into the Doklam region, which is traditionally Chinese territory. The Indian side started by claiming that there was a dispute between the Chinese and the original Sikkim border region. However, I think India subsequently backed off. But now India is using the so-called disputed territory between China and Bhutan as the reason for sending its troops into the Doklam region, because they claim that they have the right to interfere in this particular situation on behalf of Bhutan, because India has the right to act on Bhutan's behalf in terms of its military as well as foreign affair matters. However, I think the Indian claim is also very flimsy, because if fundamentally India is saying that they send its troops into this particular area that China claims there is no dispute with either Sikkim or Bhutan, and India claims there is a dispute between Bhutan and China, this will be a very, very flimsy argument. And if, for example, war does break out subsequently, which I hope it will not, then India's legal argument will be very, very weak.
Bhutan is its own complete independent sovereignty. This time around, Indian troops are inside Bhutan. Now, many Chinese netizens or viewers are wondering aloud why the Indian troops are deployed there. Do you have a mutual defense treaty, or do you think Bhutan has actually become a puppet state?
Well, I think the narrative from Indian side is totally different from what Victor has been saying, saying there is a trespass by Indian troops and all that. The whole thing came out on June 18th onwards. Bhutanese embassy in New Delhi has lodged a protest with the Chinese government, alleging that actually this road is being laid by the Chinese PLA, trying to change the status quo. So what they have opposed this, they said that it is against the agreements. That is what China and Bhutan reached, both 1998 and 88 agreements to retain the status quo until an agreement is reached about delineating the border. So it was Bhutan which protested to China first. It was not India. Of course, India went to the aid of Bhutan. They had a friendship treaty between the two countries. However, debatable that particular thing from Chinese point of view is that there is nothing secret about India and Bhutan having a very close relationship. Bhutan didn't have a diplomatic relationship with China all these years. So I don't think that India should be apologetic about going to probably defend Bhutan and its territory, what it claims. So it is not actually India transgressing Bhutanese territory as some presume here, but on the contrary, that it was Bhutanese who first tried to restrict or appeal to the PLA not to change the status quo by building the road. When that failed, then Bhutanese approached India. This is the kind of narrative that comes from Delhi.
To my knowledge, the Kingdom of Bhutan is completely dependent on the Indian economic assistance, ranging from daily necessities to massive economic assistance. Now, under this circumstance, the Chinese side may have good reasons to argue that government in Bhutan must have come under tremendous, enormous pressure from New Delhi to lodge the protest, and under this circumstance, Indian troops went into the territory of Bhutan to have a direct standoff with the PLA troops.
Now, first of all, very quickly about the status of Bhutan from the Chinese perspective. Bhutan is an independent country with sovereign rights and has the right to engage with other countries, including China, on important matters. From the Indian perspective, especially against the background of the Indian annexation of the former Kingdom of Sikkim, India views Bhutan as its protective state, and India monopolizes the military matters as well as foreign affair matters of the Kingdom of Bhutan. Now, whether this is the right thing or the wrong thing to do, I think the rest of the world will be able to pass on the judgment. But I think India in this time, using Bhutan as the excuse and sending troops into territory which India does not have a sovereign right to, is a very flimsy argument, and eventually, if the war breaks out, it may involve India, Bhutan, and China, and this does not bode well for neither of these three countries.
I think that to put things in perspective on what Victor is saying, is that India has not annexed Sikkim. I mean, as a journalist, it is a kind of a referendum that what we had, and then India was amalgamated. And it was recognized by China that Sikkim is legally part of India. So
after India has accepted Tibet as an indispensable part of China.
Sure. Yes, it is a kind of a thing. So why are we going back? And I'm a bit worried about this talk of war. Why should there be a war talk at this particular time? We had this kind of incursions or this kind of LAC violations, as both sides say, has been happening. It happened when Premier Li Keqiang visited in 2013 to India in Depsang, in a place called Depsang. And when President Xi went to India, there was a place called Chimar. It happened there. There were there was very closely held negotiations between the two countries. Both sides reached a kind of an agreements to retain status quo, because all this particular part of the boundary is definitely disputed. Do you have your point of view? India has its point of view. That's the reason there have been negotiations are being held. Now, Bhutan held 24 rounds of negotiations with India, with China on this. And how come China held these things if India restricted Bhutan in holding these particular talks? India held only 19 rounds of talks, border talks with China so far. Of course, there are no agreements. That's the reason they say that please go. Don't disturb the status quo by trying to build this particular kind of infrastructure in a disputed area.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Mr. Li Bijian, Minister Counselor with the Embassy of People's Republic of China in New Delhi. Hello, Mr. Li.
Hi, Yang Rui. Good evening.
Right. When giving an interview to the local media in India, Chinese Ambassador Luo Zhaohui reiterated that peaceful settlement is only possible when the Indian troops withdraw immediately from the Chinese territory, Doklam, and unconditionally. What is China's stance and requirement for this boundary standoff?
Hi, you're right, Yang Rui. And as everybody knows that during the interview by PTI, Press Trust India, on July 4th, my ambassador Luo Zhaohui pointed out 3 steps to resolve the current situation, namely that the India should pull back its troops. Secondly, seek a peaceful solution. And third, maintain peace and tranquility. As for the first step, that the Indian troops pull back to the Indian side of the boundary immediately and unconditionally. That is the precondition for any meaningful dialogue between China and India. Second step is to seek a peaceful solution. China attaches great importance to the China-India relations and is ready to develop a strategic partnership for cooperation with India. The current level of cooperation and friendship between China and India are hard-earned and deserve to be cherished by both sides. And the third step is to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas. China has always taken this seriously and done a lot to this end. It leads joint efforts by the both sides. And I think that these 3 steps are connected with each other. Only by fulfilling the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of Indian troops can peaceful resolution of this issue be achieved. Only by approaching the peaceful resolution can peace and the tranquility of the border areas be maintained. And I'd like to add one more. That is, only by maintaining peace and stability can India and China realize the goals of common development. And you see, in China, we have a proverb goes as, let him who tied the bell on the tiger take it off, or whoever started the trouble should end it. This time, the Indian side started the trouble. It should take immediate action to end the trouble. It's very clear that the ball is now in the court of the Indian side. Pulling back the troops immediately and unconditionally is the first step that the Indian side must do.
But the second question for you, in India, there are so many different voices from the government, the Congress, military and mass media on the boundary standoff. How do you see these different voices competing for attention?
You see that today is the 26 days when the Indian troops illegally trespassed into the Chinese territory. As far as the different views from the various entities here in India are concerned, I think they stick to their allegations more or less as a whole, that the road construction by the Chinese side has changed the status quo, Indian sending troops to protect Bhutan at the request of the latter, and claims that the boundary at the Sikkim section is not delimited, and that reiterates that the 1890 convention between China and Great Britain relating to Tibet and the Sikkim only forms the basis of the alignment. I want to state clearly here, as for the allegation that China's road construction activities changed the status quo, there has been no dispute about the fact that Dongnam is part of China. Activities conducted by the Chinese side in this area are within China's sovereign right. How can this be labeled as changing the status quo? On the contrary, it is the Indian side that trespassed illegally into the Chinese territory and changed the status quo. Now, the status quo can only be restored as long as the India withdraws its troops out from China. As for sending troops to protect Buddha, the fact is that Dongnam belongs to China and has long been under the effective jurisdiction of China. China and Buddha started the boundary talks in 1980s and have so far held 24 rounds of talks until now. Although the two countries have not delimited the boundary formally, the two sides do have basic consensus on the situation in the border areas and the boundary alignment. It is mutually recognized by the two sides that Dongnam belongs to China. India has no right to interfere with the China-Bhutan boundary talks, nor does it have any right to make territorial claims on Bhutan's behalf. India's entry into Chinese territory, citing Bhutan as an excuse, has not only infringed upon China's territorial sovereignty, but also challenged Bhutan's independence. As for the allegation that the Sikkim section is not delimited and the 1890 convention only forms the basis of the alignment, the 1890 convention explicitly stipulates that Dongnam undoubtedly belongs to China. After independence, India inherited this historical convention, and successively Indian governments have repeatedly confirmed that in written form, recognizing that it concurs with China on the boundary alignment at the Sikkim section. Now the Indian side breached the historic convention, and this will open the Pandora's box and sow the seeds of problems for the management of the border area and the bilateral relations. By the way, the Indian side is misleading the public opinion, mix the trade junction point with the trade junction area. The 1890 convention clearly stated that the mountain Chipumaucho is the trade junction point of China, Bhutan, and India.
Thank you so much for being with us. That's Mr. Li, Minister Counselor of the Chinese Embassy in New Delhi. Now, it takes a long time to clarify historical disputes surrounding the border. Now, India and Pakistan have both been recruited by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the hope that some of the contentious issues might be resolved on the platform of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Are you hopeful that this will take place, Victor?
On this particular point, I don't think Shanghai Cooperation Organization will have any significant role to play in the bilateral dispute between China and India, or in this particular case involving even the Kingdom of Bhutan, mainly because SCO, as we call it, is a regional organization very to fight against terrorism, extremism, for example. Whereas what we have right now in Donglam is very much of a problem between China and India themselves.
You don't think we'll address this issue within the multilateral framework?
I don't think so.
It's only between the two governments.
I don't think either China or India will want to put themselves into a multilateral situation involved. But let me add one point. I think the Minister Counselor in the Chinese Embassy in New Delhi used the word of trespassing in describing the situation. I think by the end of the day, the Chinese government need to use the more accurate term of military intrusion into Donglang, or even military invasion into Donglang, because the Chinese government, including the Foreign Ministry as well as the Defense Ministry, have put it very clear, and there is no way to back off. That is, the Indian troops need to be leaving this particular area, or they will be forced out or evicted. That means if there is no peace on the condition of Indian troops withdraw from Donglang, there will be a conflict expelling the Indian troops out of that Donglang area.
The other aspect concerning the current story in the border area is we see increasing clashes. Clashes might be a big word. Increasing violation of the peace and tranquility along the line of control in Kashmir. India and Pakistan accused each other of violating the status quo. Now, some of the Chinese netizens said on their social media, look, this took place against the backdrop of India's reluctance to join the Belt and Road Initiative. They complained that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor threatens to violate the Kashmir sovereignty or whatever their claims. That's why India is not very happy. And therefore, we see not only the incursion into the Chinese territory in the Sikkim section, but also more clashes between Pakistan. The latter is said to be a no-weather friend of China. Now, this involves somehow conspiracy theory. What do you think of these online commentaries?
Well, before I say anything, that the Chinese diplomat has referred to the interview that has been given to by the Chinese ambassador to India, to PTI. I'm very happy to hear that. It's because that's how India is trying to rather open up to its media and to its people the Chinese point of view. But listening to Victor, or listening to what reading the Chinese Chinese official media, we don't see the other side. Of course, the Chinese diplomat from the Chinese embassy has been articulating China's official stand. There is another point of view. I think China also must open to the other point of view before using these particular words, throw them out or push them out. Or this is not how 20th century state is conducted. But I don't hear this from the diplomats or the government. But I do see this particular talk in this in the official media, which it must desist. And if there is a small country like Bhutan is objecting to this particular road construction, saying that this is our territory, China must listen to it. It's after all, it's a small country. Yes,
you're right, Varma, that we should listen to other aspects of the same story. Now, we only heard protests from government in Bhutan, but has the Indian government listened to the non-governmental protests from Bhutan? They say this is an issue between India and China. Bhutan should not be involved. So obviously the understatement of the protests from the non-public sector of Bhutan says, arguably, or obviously, Bhutan is being used by New Delhi. Bhutan is, in fact, a puppet government. It has to listen to a coercive voice from New Delhi. Is that true?
How is it that Bhutan not a puppet government when China held 24 rounds of talks with Bhutan? I mean, there
24 rounds of negotiations getting nowhere. Is that his point?
No, I think the simple fact is that hopefully the people in Bhutan can have a referendum as to whether they want to be completely independent.
A referendum held against the bayonet of the Indian troops?
Well, that can be taken care of by other means. But I think that wishes of the people of Bhutan need to be fully respected. We are in 21st century, and I don't think any country has the right to hold another country sovereign in nature, independent in nature, as if it is a puppet state.
I'm afraid that applies to China too. I mean, that applies to China too. It's the road construction is being built through to the Bhutanese territory, as Bhutan claims. It is Bhutan is on record to protesting about this particular construction.
Mr. Li, from the Chinese embassy, said that the road is being built inside the Chinese territory. They have, Chinese troops have the sovereign right to do whatever they
Henry,
like.
that's the problem here, that, you know, that China is not willing to listen. I mean, this is the kind of an allegation, that the China is not willing to listen to the other side, the other argument, the other claims. Yes. It is when a particular neighbor says that, you know, this is my territory too. Why didn't we have all this 3,488 kilometers of Indian border?
Victor, well, here is the issue of Bhutan. Bhutan has a very close relationship with India, as he said at the beginning of the conversation. China has a very good, very reliable, all-weather relationship with Pakistan. Do you think the current standoff is most likely to involve Pakistan? Because, you know, if India is allegedly using Bhutan, an independent state, why shouldn't China take side with Pakistan or the other way around in dealing with the border dispute? I mean, that will threaten to complicate this whole situation.
I think, in all honesty, regardless of whatever the Indian government or the military have in their mind, they do not know what kind of bottle of worms they are opening up. Because if, for example, confrontation, military conflicts do break out along the Chinese-Indian border or involving, you know, Bhutan, then the whole situation may really get out of control. By the end of the day, when the dust settles, India may regret whatever actions it have taken, which lead to unfolding of a military situation involving India. And I think, you know, politicians or statesmen should really have the courage to reflect upon what options they do have. Both China and India need peace. Neither we or Indian people want to have a war against each other. I think if the situation in Don Lang is not handled properly, then India-Pakistan situation may unfold and unravel,
it's easy
for example.
Us to sit here and trade accusations or lodge protests officially or unofficially. Now, is it true, Varma, that Prime Minister Modi is getting very tough on the border issue after his meeting with President Trump in the White House? Has he got a wrong message from a president whose presidency comes under fire from within the United States? I mean, wherever he went, wherever President Trump went, there would be troubles. Following his meeting with the King of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, you know, was isolated. Following his visit to Europe, he beat a retreat from the climate change. Following his meeting with Modi, India gets very tough on border issue. Now, do you think this is something wrong? It's terribly wrong.
Before I come to your point, I just want to make only one point. That is, pragmatism is what guided India and China all these 4 decades. Not a single bullet is fired. It's not simply a record that what India takes pride. I think that China also takes pride that in this 3,488 kilometers long border, not a bullet fired, despite the fact that we had a war in 1962. So it is a kind of a record that we managed to hold between the two countries because it is pragmatism that guided us. There was no point in this particular long boundary that we had, you know, a kind of an agreement. But still, we are holding talks. There is a frequent boundary talks are going. And so I think this will definitely, I'm sure, the diplomatic channels are open.
Time is up. Time is up.
There is no need for war talk.
Time is up. This is a very constructive dialogue, hopefully for seeking a peaceful solution to a long-term bound standoff. I thank you so much for being this part of the meaningful dialogue. My thanks also go to Minister Li Bijian from the Chinese Ministry in New Delhi. Until next time, goodbye.